So I started making circles because it took me a while longer than I anticipated. So what I essentially did was just take my circle maker and did the circles at every interval on the circle maker. You can certainly do this by hand. As you can see here, I had to do the rest of it by hand because the circle maker wasn't big enough to continue with the circles. So these I did by hand, and you can actually do all of them by hand. Just try to keep an eye on the distance between each circle so that it doesn't get all wobbly. So this part is going to take you a while. It did take me quite a bit to get this done, and as you can see here, I started about a quarter of the way up from the top of the paper, and then I worked my way out. So you want to keep your circles closer to the top because we're going to be doing a little mountain layer underneath all of the circles. So continue doing this until your circles have reached the very edge of your paper. Once the circles have been completed, you just pencil in a little mountain range. It doesn't have to be anything spectacular, as you can see here. Just a couple of lines up, a couple of lines down. Do not make the lines even, break them up a little, make them a little scraggly, and make sure that you put at least the center mountain up into your swirl of circles, and erase any of the circles or any of the circular lines that fall below the mountain. Once that's done, I am going to continue putting in the circular marks or the circle pencil markings along the bottom of the mountain. I also decided, since these mountains are pretty high up, that I was going to add like a little second set of mountains, and I'm just going to do that closer to the edge of the paper, so you'll have two sets of mountains, one in the distance and one in the forefront. I will be using my White Night set of paints, and I'm going to be using the color turquoise and indigo. So to begin, I am going to put a layer of water over the paper, and we're just going to do it right over the pencil marks. I'm not going to erase any of the pencil marks. I'm not going to lighten any of the pencil marks because I'm going to be using two blues, and pretty sure that it's going to be a little bit difficult to see the pencil marks if we lighten them. So we're going to leave them as is, and we are going to wet the paper above the mountains, so only where you see your circle marks. I'm going to take a bit of turquoise, and I am using my silver black velvet brush because it's a nice soft brush and it'll give me a nice soft look to the piece. So I'm going to take a little bit of that turquoise and apply a light layer. The key to this one is to keep the middle, so the part where the circle begins, a little bit lighter than the rest of the piece. We don't want to go too dark on this piece, but we also don't want to go too light because we want to be able to really see the shimmer. So I'm going to apply the turquoise darker on the edges and around the mountains than in the middle. Once I am satisfied with how the turquoise looks, I'm going to pick up some indigo, and this indigo is a really much darker shade of this turquoise. It leans very, very turquoise instead of like a dark blue. So I really like mixing these two together. They go really well together. So I am going to darken the edges of the piece with the indigo. We're going to bring some of it in, but again, make sure to water down the inside as much as possible because we want to keep that a little bit lighter than the outside edges. We're going to want to make sure that this is fully dry before we move on to the next step. The top doesn't really need to be dry, but the bottom edge where the mountains are going to go, that really needs to be dry because you don't want your mountain bleeding into the sky. So I'm going to go ahead and use that same color, the indigo, and I'm going to saturate the brush with the indigo, especially towards the top of the mountain. Right now, you don't need to get this perfect because we are going to slap some paint on it and then let it dry and come back to it after we're done adding the rings to the sky. So for now, just make sure that the edges of the mountains are, the very top edges, are fully saturated, and then you can water down the rest. When we get to the bottom, I am not going to worry too much about letting it dry so that the second set of mountains, doesn't bleed into the first. We're not going to worry about that too much because this is only our first layer and we are going to add more to it. So we can define that a little bit later. Right now, just make sure that the second set of mountains is fully saturated from the top to the bottom so that it could stand out against the background. Once that has dried, I am going to clip my paper to the board, only because my paper has warped a little and it's just going to make it easier to paint the swirls, the circles, if your paper is laying fairly flat. I am going to switch to a size 2 brush. You want to go as thin as possible, and I will be using Solaris, Supercluster, Galaxy, Interstellar, and Lightning Flash for this. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to use all of the colors within each circle. So the colors, you don't have to lay them down precisely. You can press down on the tip of your brush to make some strokes a little bit thicker than the other. We are going to leave a couple of spaces in between the colors, so when you're switching colors, don't put it right next to each other, just leave a little bit of a gap, a tiny gap. We're trying to make these as irregular as possible while kind of keeping that circular shape. So as you can see, I am switching between all of the colors. Sometimes I'll let the colors run into each other, other times I'll leave a gap. Kind of go with the flow on this. This part is absolutely going to take you a while. So you're going to see that I'm going to speed up a little. We're going to do a little bit of a time lapse. I am going to show you pieces of it as I'm working through it, because this part of the painting took me a good 45 minutes to an hour to go through every single circle switch colors, clean my brush off. So this, throw some music on and relax while you're doing this. You'll see some areas I'll put a very heavy stroke, some areas I'll put a very fine stroke. So for this piece, just have fun with it and switch between all of your colors. When you get to the edges, just try not to get any of the shimmers into the mountain because paint usually is not going to cover that up. It'll come right through the paint. So try your best to keep it off of the mountains and give it the sense that it is radiating from behind. Once the background has fully dried, we're going to go in once again to define the edges of the top mountain. So we're going to make them a little bit more precise and a little darker. So as you can see here, I am using a saturated brush. Just fill that brush up with as much paint as possible, get it as dark as possible over the very top of the mountain. And we are going to bring the color a lot further down than we did the first time. So now is when we want to be a little bit more precise with our color placement. Once you are satisfied with how saturated it is, make sure that it fully dries before you move on to the next step. So the next step is going to be doing the mountain in the forefront. And again, with this one, you want to fully saturate every single part of it. So make sure you load as much color as you can onto your brush and define those edges. Finally, make sure the entire piece is fully dry before moving on, and we are going to add some detail to our mountains, both sets, with some gold. So I am going to link in the description below the tutorial that I put on how I paint mountains, and we're going to do the exact same thing, the exact same process, except we are going to use shimmer. So one thing to note about using shimmers in a pretty big area is that once you put those shimmers down, they tend not to move. So once you put water on the edges to pull it out, you will get some of that shine, some of the shimmer particles moving out towards the water, but the majority of it will stay in place. So once you have that set area where you want it to be pretty shimmery, what you're going to do is add some more shimmer to that area. Once you are done and you are satisfied with the way it looks, you can pull out the little tiny particles of shimmer with water. So as you can see here, all I'm doing is wetting the paper with the brush without adding any more shimmer. Again, we are adding the shimmer where we want it, as I am demonstrating here. And now I am going to take a clean, wet brush and pull some of that out. So you can see there is a little bit of movement in the shimmer, and what's going to happen is you're just going to get particles, just shimmery, small particles on your paper. So the rest of your mountain will have that shiny effect and it will shimmer in the light, but the majority will stay where you initially put it. So we're going to continue doing this for both sets of mountains. Once you are satisfied with your shimmer placements, then you are done. Allow the piece to completely dry and you have a beautiful shimmery piece. I'll see you in the next one.